My dear child, I am walking through your house tonight, and I need you to leave the lights on, because the rooms I am about to enter have been dark for so long you have forgotten what they looked like when they were lit. Do not scroll past this. What I am about to tell you is not about a distant spiritual event. It is about tonight, about the specific house you live in, not the building with walls and a roof, but the interior structure of your life that has been going dark room by room over seasons of loss that no one saw dimming. The switches one at a time, until the person navigating the hallways was doing so by memory rather than by light. I designed this house, and I am walking through it tonight. The original architect does not need a tour of a house he designed. He knows every room, not from a blueprint consulted before the visit, but from the act of creation itself. The intimate, hand-level, wall-by-wall knowledge of someone who decided where every room would be, what light would enter through every window, and what each space was designed to hold when it was fully inhabited and fully bright. My beloved child, you have been moving through your own house in the dark. Room by room the lights went out, not all at once. That would have been dramatic enough to provoke a response. Gradually, one loss dimmed the kitchen. One disappointment darkened the hallway. One season of unanswered hoping switched off the room where your expectation used to live. And the gradual dimming produced an adaptation so complete that darkness became your normal operating environment. You navigate by memory now, not by light. Tonight I am entering the house, and what I carry with me is the original light specification for every room the darkness has claimed. Stay here. What I reveal next is which room I am entering first, and what it was designed to look like before the first light went out. Type walking through if your interior life has been going dark room by room. And God just told you, the original architect is entering your house tonight carrying the light specification for every room that forgot it was ever meant to be bright. Before we go any further, I need to tell you something that genuinely surprised me. A neuroscientist discovered a simple 7-second technique that actually rewires how your brain processes thoughts. And when I tried it, the difference was almost unsettling. My focus sharpened, ideas started connecting faster, and that mental fog, gone. This isn't manifestation nonsense. It's backed by real brain science, and thousands of people are already seeing results. But here's the catch. Only 5 spots are left. If something inside you is saying, try it, trust that instinct. Click the link in the description or pinned comment before it's too late. The footsteps you are hearing right now are not passing by your house. They are inside it, moving through the hallway with the unhurried pace of someone who knows where every room is, because he placed every wall. My beloved child, I need you to understand the difference between a visitor walking through a house and the architect walking through one. A visitor observes. A visitor evaluates. A visitor notices the darkness and comments on it from the perspective of someone who is comparing what they see to what they expected. But the architect does not compare what he sees to what he expected. He compares what he sees to what he designed. And the gap between the two is not a judgment. It is a restoration order. I am carrying restoration orders tonight, one for every room. My dear one, the footsteps are deliberate. Each step is placed with the intention of someone who is not touring the house but assessing it, room by room, space by space, not for the purpose of documenting what went wrong, but for the purpose of identifying what needs to be returned to the original design specification. The specification is not a lower standard I am trying to restore you to. It is the highest possible expression of what each room was designed to hold when I drew it. The specification exceeds what the rooms contained even before the darkness began. This message was not released for everyone whose life feels dim. This was aimed at the one person whose specific house whose specific interior architecture was designed by an architect whose restoration visit was always scheduled for tonight. The one person whose hallway is hearing footsteps right now that belong to the only presence whose knowledge of the house does not come from observation, but from the act of having designed and built it from the first wall to the last window. The footsteps are mine. The house is yours, and the restoration that begins tonight addresses rooms you forgot existed because the darkness hid them that completely. Type restoration order if you just felt footsteps inside your house. Unhurried, deliberate, belonging. And God is carrying restoration orders for every room whose darkness you accepted as permanent because the dimming was so gradual you forgot what the light looked like. I have been standing outside your house for longer than tonight, watching the lights go out one window at a time with the specific grief of an architect who knows what each room was designed to carry and is watching it go dark from the outside, my dear one. Not from a distance, from the front of the house, close enough to see which window went dark and in what order and during which season. Close enough to trace the sequence of the dimming. Which loss darkened which room first, which disappointment followed, which season of unanswered hoping extinguished the last light that was still visible from the outside, and left the house completely dark for the first time since it was built. I watched every light go out, and I remember every room they belonged to. My beloved child, I watched you from outside the house during the specific season the last light went dark. There was a night, you know the season if not the exact date, when the final room that was still carrying light went dark. It was not the largest room, it was the smallest. The room where the last remaining flicker of expectation was being kept alive by a hope so reduced it could barely sustain the wattage required to produce visible light from the outside. That small light was what I watched from the front of the house. And when it went out, the house went fully dark for the first time. I chose you for this message because the fully dark house activated the restoration protocol. An architect who watches a house dim room by room waits, not from indifference, but from the knowledge that premature restoration in a house whose inhabitant is still in the process of releasing the systems that caused the dimming produces a restoration that the inhabitant's current operating system will redim. The waiting was strategic, but the fully dark house is the threshold, and tonight I crossed it. Type last light if God has been standing outside your house watching the lights go out window by window, and the night the final room went dark activated the restoration protocol that brings the original architect through the front door tonight. I know what it has been like to navigate your own house in the dark, my beloved child. Not the dramatic darkness of a sudden blackout that shocks the system into crisis and produces the urgent search for light that a sudden loss of power generates. The gradual darkness, the kind that adjusts so slowly your eyes adapted to each reduction without ever registering the loss as a discrete event. One room dimmed and your pupils widened slightly. Another room darkened and your pupils widened further. By the time the house was fully dark, your eyes had adjusted so completely that you could move through every hallway and every room without stumbling. Not because you could see, but because you had memorized the layout well enough to navigate by touch. You learned to live without light, and the learning was its own form of loss. My child, I watched the adaptation happen with the specific grief of an architect who designed every room with a particular light specification. The rooms were not designed for darkness. The hallways were not drawn for navigation by memory. The windows were positioned at specific angles to receive specific light at specific times of day. And the gradual dimming that covered every window and extinguished every internal source produced a version of the house that the original design would not recognize. You are living in a house I designed that no longer resembles what I designed it to be. The rooms are still there, the walls still stand, the structure is intact. But structure without light is shelter without warmth. And you have been sheltered without warmth for long enough that warmth itself has become a concept you remember rather than a condition you experience. I watched you stop noticing the absence. That was the stage that activated the deepest grief. Because a person who is aware of the darkness is a person who remembers the light. A person who stops noticing the darkness is a person whose reference point for light has been erased by the duration of the dimming. Your reference point has been erased, and tonight I am restoring it. The deepest wound the darkness inflicted was not the dimming of the rooms. It was the moment you stopped leaving the lights on because you stopped expecting anyone significant to arrive. My dear child, there was a season before the full darkness when you still left one light on, not for yourself, for the possibility that something or someone might arrive that warranted a lit house, the possibility that tonight might be the night the guest would come, and the house would need to be presentable, and the hallway would need to be navigable by someone other than the person who had memorized the layout. You left the light on for hope, and hope did not arrive often enough to justify the electricity. My beloved child, I watched the specific night you turned off the last light that was being kept on for the possibility of arrival. The decision was not dramatic, it was efficient. The cost of maintaining a light for a guest who never came exceeded the emotional budget your system was willing to allocate to preparation without payoff. The preparation was expensive. The empty doorway was consistent, and the equation, preparation cost versus arrival probability, eventually produced a number your system could not justify. The light went off, and the decision to turn it off was the moment you officially stopped preparing for arrival. That moment wounded me deeper than the gradual dimming, because the gradual dimming was circumstantial, produced by losses that accumulated without your permission. But the turning off of the last light was volitional. You chose to stop expecting. And a person who chooses to stop expecting is a person whose disappointment has exceeded their capacity to maintain hope without evidence. My dear one, the guest you stopped expecting is standing in your hallway right now, inside the dark house. Having entered the door you did not know was unlocked. And the first thing the guest is doing is not looking for the light switch. He is being the light. Type stopped, expecting if you turned off the last light because the guest never came, and the cost of preparing for an arrival that never happened exceeded the budget your heart could afford. And God just told you the guest you stopped expecting is already inside the house. The darkness was never permanent. It was the temporary condition of a house whose lights were designed with a restoration mechanism. The dimming could never permanently override, my beloved one. I need to release you from the conclusion the darkness installed. The conclusion says, the lights went out and the lights stay out. The darkness is the new permanent state of the house because the circumstances that caused the dimming have not reversed, and the losses that extinguished the light have not been returned, and the disappointments that darkened each room are still sitting in the rooms they darkened. The conclusion is built on a premise the architect rejects. The premise is that the lights depend on the circumstances. They do not. My child, the lights in your house were not wired to your circumstances. They were wired to the architect's design. When the circumstances dimmed the rooms, the lights responded to the circumstances rather than to the design. And the response produced the gradual darkness that your system accepted as permanent, because the circumstances that caused it appeared permanent. But circumstances are not wiring, and the architect's wiring is still intact beneath the dark. Every room that went dark still contains the original wiring I installed when the house was built. The bulbs may have dimmed. The switches may have been turned off by seasons that did not have the authority to redesign the electrical system. But the wiring, the foundational infrastructure that carries the capacity for light to every room in the house, that wiring was not touched by the dimming. It remains intact, waiting for the architect to walk through and reconnect what the circumstances disconnected. My dear one, the dimming was surface level. It affected the output without affecting the infrastructure. And an architect who walks through a house whose infrastructure is intact does not need to rebuild the electrical system. He needs to flip the switches that the circumstances turned off. The switches are being flipped tonight, and the wiring that was always there is about to carry light to rooms the darkness convinced you were permanently without it. The first switch was just flipped, and the room it belongs to is receiving light for the first time in so long that the sudden brightness is producing the specific disorientation of eyes that adapted to darkness encountering illumination they forgot existed. My beloved child, something changed in your internal space within the last few days. Not a circumstantial change, a light change, a warmth appearing in a specific area of your interior house that has been dark for a duration long enough that the warmth felt foreign rather than familiar, as though the room receiving it was encountering a temperature it had no recent memory of processing. The warmth was the first light, and the first light came from the architect's hand on the first switch. My dear one, I am moving through your house in a specific order, not randomly restoring rooms as I encounter them, sequentially, beginning with the room whose darkness was affecting the most rooms around it, the central room whose light, when it was on, illuminated adjacent spaces through doorways and connecting hallways. The central room's dimming produced a cascading darkness. Its restoration produces a cascading light. The first room I restored is the one whose light reaches the most rooms. I have been planning this restoration walk behind the season of your adaptation to the darkness, while you were navigating the house by memory and adjusting your eyes to increasingly dim conditions. I was at the original blueprint, reviewing the light specification for every room, sequencing the restoration order for maximum cascading effect, and timing the walk for the specific night when the inhabitants' adaptation to the darkness had reached the point where the contrast between dark and restored would produce the maximum impact. My child, the contrast is the testimony. A house that was always lit does not carry the story of restoration. A house that was dark and is now being lit room by the architect's own hand carries a story that no always lit house can tell. Type first switch if you felt a warmth return to a specific area of your interior life this week. A room that has been dark receiving its first light. And you believe the original architect just flipped the first switch in a sequential restoration that is designed to cascade through every dark room in your house. God is walking through your house tonight. And the title says leave the lights on for him because the architect who is restoring every dark room needs the inhabitant to participate in one specific way that the restoration cannot be completed without. My dear one, the architect can flip switches. He can restore wiring. He can carry light into rooms whose darkness has been present for years. But there is one action only the inhabitant can perform, and the action is what the title is requesting. Leave the lights on after they are restored. My beloved child, this is directly connected to the title and to the specific pattern your interior life has been following. The dimming was not a single event. It was a pattern, a repeated sequence where light was present, circumstances extinguished it, and the inhabitant adapted to the new darkness rather than searching for the switch the circumstances turned off. The pattern produced the fully dark house, and the pattern's continuation after the restoration would produce a re-darkened house. The architect restores, the inhabitant maintains. Both roles are essential. And the leaving of the lights on is not a task that requires effort from a position of strength. It requires a single decision from a position of trust. The decision to believe that the light the architect just restored belongs in the room permanently rather than temporarily. The decision to stop assuming that every light that comes on will eventually go off the way every previous light did. The decision to treat the restoration as the original design being reinstalled rather than a temporary improvement that the next disappointing season will reverse. My child, the lights the architect is restoring tonight are wired to the original design, not to the circumstances that dimmed them. And lights wired to the original design do not respond to circumstances the way circumstance-dependent lights do. They respond to the architect. And the architect does not dim what he just restored. The architect is approaching the room you are most afraid to see lit. The one whose darkness has been present the longest, and whose contents you stopped wanting illuminated, because what the light would reveal is the room you are most ashamed of. My beloved child, every house has one room the inhabitant does not want the guest to enter. The room where those painful losses are stored. The room where the things that could not be processed in the light were placed in the dark and left there, not resolved, not removed, just hidden by the absence of light that made the contents invisible to anyone walking through the house, including the person who placed them there. The architect's footsteps are heading toward that room, and your instinct is to redirect him. My dear one, I know which room it is. I do not need you to identify it. I designed the room. I know its original purpose, and what it holds right now. The things the darkness has been hiding are not what I am coming to inspect. I am coming to restore the room to its original design. And the restoration process includes the removal of what was stored in the room during the dark season that does not belong to the room's design specification. The things in the dark will be addressed, but not with the energy your shame is expecting. Everything has been building toward this room. The first switch that was flipped in the central room, the cascading light that is spreading through adjacent spaces, the sequential restoration that is moving through the house in an order designed to build the inhabitants' trust. Before the architect reaches the room that requires the most trust. The architect earned your trust in the easier rooms, and the trust that was built in the easier rooms is what will hold you steady when the light enters the room you have been keeping dark on purpose. Type that room if you know exactly which room in your interior life the architect is approaching. The one whose darkness you have been maintaining deliberately, because the light would reveal what you placed there during the seasons you could not process, and you are afraid of what the restoration will uncover, but you can feel the architect's footsteps approaching with an intention that does not carry condemnation. The architect just entered the room. The light is on, and what the illumination is revealing is not what your shame expected the guest to see, because the architect is not looking at what you stored in the darkness. He is looking at the walls he designed. My beloved child, this is the moment the light enters the room you were most afraid to have illuminated, and the architect's eyes go not to the contents you are ashamed of, but to the structure he built. The walls, the windows, the foundation, the original design that exists beneath and around and behind what the dark season deposited in a space that was never designed to hold it. He sees his design, not your deposits. God is walking through your house tonight, and the room you kept dark on purpose has just been entered by the one person whose response to what the light reveals is not the condemnation your shame was bracing for, but the specific, tender, design remembering gaze of a creator who looks at a room filled with what the darkness accumulated and says, I remember what this room was built for, and what it was built for is still here. Beneath everything, my child, the architect is not cataloging the mess. He is identifying the design, and the identification is producing a restoration order for the room that is fundamentally different from the cleaning your shame was expecting. The shame expected the guest to say, look at what you did to this room. The architect is saying, look at what this room was designed to be. Two completely different sentences produced by two completely different kinds of seeing. The shame sees the deposit. The architect sees the design. And the design is what the restoration restores. Not by removing the deposits first, but by restoring the light first. Because light in a room changes the inhabitant's relationship to everything the darkness was hiding. The light is on, the room is visible, and the architect is already restoring. Now that the most feared room has been entered, and the architect's response was restoration rather than condemnation, everything about your relationship to the dark rooms in your house is being permanently restructured, my dear child. This is what happens when the room you were most afraid to have illuminated receives light, and the response is design seeing rather than deposit judging. The fear that was governing every other dark room collapses. Because the fear was built on a single premise. The guest will see what I placed in the darkness, and the seeing will produce a verdict, I cannot survive. The premise just died in the most feared room, and a premise that dies in the hardest room cannot sustain itself in the easier ones. If the architect restored the worst room, the remaining rooms carry no fear. My beloved child, the cascading effect is now operating in two directions simultaneously. The light is cascading from restored rooms into adjacent dark ones. Illumination spreading through doorways and connecting hallways, the way the original design intended light to travel through the house. And the trust is cascading from the most feared room into every remaining dark space. The confidence that the architect's response to darkness is restoration rather than condemnation spreading through the inhabitant's internal system at a pace the light itself cannot match. The trust is traveling faster than the light, and trust that arrives before the light prepares the room to receive the restoration without the shame-based resistance that would have blocked it. Your house is being restored from two directions: light from the architect, trust from the evidence, and the combination of the two is producing a transformation speed that neither could achieve alone. Rooms that have been dark for years are receiving light for the first time, and the inhabitant who adapted to the darkness is walking behind the architect, watching spaces they forgot existed reappear under illumination that reveals not the shame of the dark season, but the beauty of the original design. Type trust cascading if you can feel the fear of the other dark rooms collapsing. After watching the architect, enter the most feared room and respond with restoration rather than condemnation. And the trust spreading through your interior house is traveling faster than the light, because what you witnessed in the hardest room proved the architect's intention for every room that remains. Let me show you what your house looks like when every room has received the architect's restoration, and the light specification is running at the full design capacity for the first time since the first room dimmed. My dear one, the first thing that changes is the temperature. A fully lit house does not just produce visibility, it produces warmth. The specific whole house, every room contributing warmth, occurs when light is present in every space simultaneously, and the combined output of all the rooms creates a thermal environment the dark house could never generate. You are about to feel warm in your own life for the first time in years. My beloved child, the warmth is not metaphorical. It is the actual spiritual temperature change that occurs when the interior of a person's life transitions from adapted darkness to restored light across every room. The warmth enters the hallways. It fills the corners. It reaches the specific cold spots that formed in the rooms where the darkness was longest and the adaptation was deepest. The cold spots are warming, and the warming changes how you inhabit your own house. You have been moving through your house with the contracted posture of someone navigating a cold environment. Shoulders tightened, steps quick, spending as little time as possible in the rooms that carried the deepest chill. The warmth that the full restoration produces will release the contraction. Your shoulders will soften. Your steps will slow. Your time in rooms you previously moved through quickly will extend because the rooms are no longer producing the chill that made lingering feel unbearable. You are going to linger in your own life for the first time. Stand in rooms you used to rush through. Occupy spaces you used to avoid. Inhabit your own interior house with the unhurried, fully present, warmth-surrounded settledness of a person whose architect just restored every room to a light level the darkness had made you forget was possible. People are going to notice the warmth radiating from your house before you tell them the architect walked through it. Because a fully restored house produces an atmospheric output that others detect when they enter your proximity. My beloved child, the ones who knew you during the dark season, who sensed the chill, who felt the contracted posture, who registered the specific atmospheric quality of a person moving through their own life, with the quick, avoidance-patterned steps of someone whose interior rooms were too cold and too dark to inhabit fully. Those people are about to encounter a different house, not a different person. A restored house inside the same person, and the restoration changes the atmosphere completely. My child, there is a specific quality that a person carries when their interior house is fully lit by the original architect's specification. It is not performance. It is not the manufactured brightness of someone who is projecting light from the surface, while the rooms behind the surface remain dark. It is the authentic whole house, every room contributing radiance of a person whose interior space is genuinely illuminated, producing warmth that radiates outward through every interaction, the way heat radiates through the walls of a house whose every room is warm. They will say something changed about you. They will mean the house is lit. Connections that require warmth to form are about to begin entering your life. There are relationships and opportunities that function the way guests function. They approach a house, they sense the temperature radiating from it, and they decide whether to enter based on what the atmosphere tells them about the environment inside. A cold house repels approach, a warm house invites it. My dear one, the restoration just changed your house from a cold structure that repelled approach into a warm one that invites entry. And what enters a warm house is fundamentally different from what circles a cold one. Type warm house if you believe the restoration is changing the atmosphere that radiates from your life. And what is about to approach the warmth of a fully lit house is fundamentally different from what was circling the cold structure the dark season was producing. I need you to understand why I designed your house with the number of rooms I did, my beloved child. Because the number of rooms reveals something about the capacity I built into your life that the darkness prevented you from ever discovering. Most houses carry a standard number of rooms, enough for a functional life. Enough to hold the standard components of a human existence. The room for purpose, the room for relationships, the room for rest, the rooms for the basic dimensions that a person needs to navigate their life with adequate space. Your house is not a standard house. It carries rooms that standard houses do not contain. My child, When I drew your blueprint, I included rooms whose purpose the standard blueprint does not require. Rooms designed for callings that exceed standard scope. Rooms built for relational depths that standard dimensions cannot hold. Rooms whose light specification was calibrated for a brightness that standard wiring cannot sustain. Which is why the wiring I installed in your house carries a higher capacity than any standard house the darkness allowed you to compare yours to. You have been living in a house with rooms you have never entered. Because the darkness covered them so completely, you did not know they existed. I chose you for this restoration, because the rooms the darkness hid include rooms whose purpose has not yet been activated in your life. They have been sitting in the blueprint, designed, built, wired, waiting, hidden by a darkness that prevented the inhabitant from ever discovering that their house was larger than the rooms they were navigating by memory. My dear one, the restoration is not just returning light to the rooms you knew. It is revealing rooms you did not know were part of your house. Rooms whose doors were hidden by the darkness. Rooms whose purpose will become clear only when the light reaches the hallways that lead to them. Your house is bigger than the darkness let you believe, and the architect knows every room. The doubt surfacing right now is asking the question the darkness trained you to ask. What if the lights go out again and the house returns to the same darkness the restoration just addressed? My child, it sounds like this. I have seen lights come on before. Seasons where something brightened temporarily and the rooms felt alive for a period, and the warmth returned long enough for the adaptation to reverse partially before the circumstances produced another dimming and the rooms went dark again, and the redarkening was worse than the original darkness, because the contrast between the temporary light and the returning dark produced a despair the gradual dimming never carried. That doubt is projecting the pattern of circumstance-dependent light onto architect-dependent light. And the two operate on completely different wiring. My beloved child, the lights that went out before were wired to circumstances. They responded to what was happening around the house, rather than what was designed into the house. Circumstance-dependent light is real light. It produces genuine brightness, genuine warmth, genuine illumination. But its power source is external, and external power sources are subject to the disruptions that external conditions produce. The lights the architect is restoring tonight are not wired to circumstances. They are wired to the original design, and design-dependent light draws its power from the architect's specification rather than from the conditions surrounding the house. Conditions change. The specification does not. The previous lights went out because their power source was external, and the external source was disrupted. The restored lights cannot go out the same way because their power source is internal, embedded in the wiring the architect installed when the house was built and reactivated tonight by the architect's own hand on switches that respond to his touch rather than to the weather outside. Type different wiring if the doubt just tried to use previous temporary brightening as evidence that the restoration will also be temporary. And you now understand that the architect's light is wired to the original design rather than to circumstances, and design-wired light does not respond to the conditions that extinguished circumstance-wired light. During every season of the darkening, I was not outside the house watching the windows go dark from a distance that permitted observation without involvement. I was in the hallway between the rooms, present in the darkness the entire time, my beloved child. You imagined a God who watched the house go dark from the curb, who stood at the street observing each window lose its light with the detached concern of a neighbor who notices the dimming but does not enter the house to address it, who was aware of the darkness but occupied a position outside the structure that made the awareness distant rather than intimate. I was never on the curb. I was in the hallway. My child, when the first room went dark, I moved from outside the house to inside it. Not to restore the light. The restoration was scheduled for tonight, and the timing could not be moved, but to be present in the darkness with the person who was beginning to navigate by memory rather than by light. To walk the dark hallways alongside an inhabitant who believed they were walking them alone. Your footsteps in the dark were never the only footsteps. There were nights when the darkness was heaviest, when the accumulation of dimmed rooms produced a density in the atmosphere of the house that made the air itself feel thick. And in those nights, you felt something that the darkness should not have produced. A warmth, not from a room, not from a light source. A warmth that seemed to radiate from the air in the hallway itself, as though the space between the walls was generating a heat that had no visible source. The source was me, standing in the hallway, radiating presence into an atmosphere the darkness was trying to make unlivable. Not enough light to see by, but enough warmth to survive. I kept the house above the temperature where hope freezes, and I did it from inside the dark. I know which room went dark first, my dear one. And I know it because I was standing in that room when the light went out, and I caught the bulb in my hand before the glass hit the floor. Not every room carries the same significance to the dimming sequence. Most rooms darkened as part of the cascading effect, the secondary dimming that occurs when a central room loses its light, and the adjacent rooms that depended on the spillover lose their illumination in sequence. But the first room, the one that started the cascade, that room carries the origin of the entire dark season. My beloved child, I know what happened in that room on the day the first light went out. The specific loss, the precise disappointment, the named event that entered the room carrying enough weight to extinguish a light that had been burning since the house was first inhabited. The event did not announce itself as the beginning of a dark season. It announced itself as a single difficult day. But the single difficult day dimmed the room that the rest of the house depended on for cascading light. The first room determined the sequence, and the sequence produced the full darkness. I was in the room when it happened. My hand caught the extinguished bulb, not to relight it in that moment, but to hold it. To preserve the specific bulb that belonged to the specific room that started the cascade, so that when the restoration night arrived, the architect could reinstall the original bulb in the original room, and the cascading light would travel the same pathways the cascading darkness had traveled, reversing the sequence exactly. The bulb has been in my hand this entire time, held for tonight. And the bulb I just reinstalled in the first room is the same bulb that went dark on the day the event that started everything entered a room the architect designed to carry the light the rest of the house depends on. Type first room if God just identified the specific room where the darkness began, the loss that started the cascade, and the bulb that went out on that day has been held in the architect's hand ever since, preserved for tonight's restoration, and reinstalled in the exact room that determines the light for every room connected to it. Now that the architect has walked through every room, and the restoration is active, there is one thing I need you to do, my beloved child, and it is the instruction the title has been carrying since the first word. Leave the lights on. Not a single dramatic act of faith, a daily practice. A moment-by-moment decision to not reach for the switch when the old instinct activates. Because the old instinct will activate. The adaptation to darkness runs deep, patterned into your daily operating system by seasons of dimming that taught your hands to reach for the switch every time a room felt too bright for what you had become accustomed to. Brightness will feel uncomfortable at first, and the discomfort will tell your hand to dim what the architect just restored. My child, do not dim what I restored. The discomfort is not evidence that the light is too much. It is evidence that your eyes have not yet readjusted to the brightness they were originally designed to see by. The readjustment takes time, and during the readjustment, the adapted to darkness system will interpret full specification light as excess rather than design. It is not excess, it is design. And the discomfort is temporary while the design is permanent. When a room feels too bright, when the restored light illuminates something you preferred to keep in darkness, when the warmth reaches a corner that the cold had been protecting from exposure, when the fullness of the architect's specification produces an interior experience so different from the dark season's normal that your system flags it as abnormal. Do not reach for the switch. Stand in the brightness. Let the eyes adjust. Let the warmth reach the cold corners. Let the fullness replace the contracted half-living, the dark season, installed as your standard operating experience. The architect did not restore the house to a moderate light level. He restored it to full specification, and full specification requires an inhabitant who is willing to be fully lit. You made it to the fully lit house, my beloved child, and I need you to stand in the hallway where I stood during the dark season and feel what it means to see every room illuminated by the hand that designed them. Feel the light, not from one direction, from every room simultaneously. The specific whole house cascading, architect-restored radiance that enters the hallway from every doorway at once, producing an illumination so complete that the person standing in it casts no shadow because the light is arriving from too many directions for darkness to find a surface to land on. No shadows in the hallway, for the first time since the first room dimmed. I want to thank you for something the dark season made almost impossible to sustain. Thank you for staying in the house. Thank you for navigating by memory when navigation by light was no longer available. Thank you for the nights you moved through dark hallways, carrying the specific loneliness of a person who believed they were the only one walking through the rooms, not knowing the architect's footsteps were beside theirs in a darkness too dense for either set of feet to be heard by the other. My dear child, you never walked alone in the dark, and the hallway that holds my footprints beside yours will carry the evidence of both presences when the light reveals what the darkness was hiding on the floor. Let the tears come, not dark season tears, not the tears of a person moving through an unlived-in house whose rooms produce nothing but the memory of what they used to feel like. Restoration tears, the tears of an inhabitant standing in their own hallway, watching the architect move from room to room flipping switches, with the unhurried tenderness of someone who designed every space and is now returning every space to the brightness it was always meant to carry. The house is lit, the architect is present, and the warmth filling every room right now is the temperature your house was always designed to hold. Type every room lit if tears are forming right now because you are standing in your own hallway, watching the architect restore every room, and the light entering from every doorway simultaneously is producing a warmth you forgot your house was designed to carry, returning the temperature of a life that the darkness convinced you would never feel warm again. You are not the person living in the dark house anymore, my beloved child. That identity, the one who navigated by memory because the light was gone, the one who adapted to each dimming so completely that darkness became the baseline their eyes accepted as permanent, the one who stopped leaving lights on because they stopped expecting anyone significant to arrive, the one who kept one room dark on purpose, because the shame of what was stored inside it was easier to hide than to have illuminated by a guest whose response they could not predict. That identity, was retired room by room as the architect walked through with restoration orders and flipped every switch the circumstances had turned off. You are the inhabitant of a fully lit house now, and fully lit does not dim. The darkness that defined your interior life, your self-perception, your capacity for warmth, your willingness to linger in your own rooms, and your belief about whether the architect still remembered the design has been permanently replaced by a restoration so comprehensive that the house the darkness produced is unrecognizable from the house the light revealed. Same walls, same rooms, same hallways, completely different experience, because experience depends on light, and the light is back. My dear child, the architect is not leaving after the restoration. He is staying. From this moment forward, you carry the identity of someone whose house is inhabited by the one who designed it. Not visited, inhabited. The architect who walked through tonight did not perform a repair call and return to a distant office. He entered the house he built, restored every room to the specification he drew, and remained present in the hallway, available in every room, carrying light in his person that supplements the restored wiring and ensures that no room in the house will ever go dark again without the architect being the first to notice and the first to respond. The house is not self-lit, it is architect-lit, and the architect lives in the house now. You were living in a dark house that was designed for light. Tonight the original architect walked through, restored every room to full specification, and took up permanent residence in the hallway where his footsteps walked beside yours through every season of darkness you navigated alone. The house is warm, the rooms are bright, the corners that carried cold are radiating. The room you were most afraid to have illuminated is restored to a purpose the darkness was hiding. And the God who designed every wall and every window and every room is standing in the hallway of a house that will never go dark again. Not because the circumstances changed, but because the architect moved in. Leave the lights on, my beloved child. The guest you stopped expecting just arrived, and he is not leaving. Subscribe to this channel so that every time the original architect walks through your house, the restoration reaches you before the adaptation to darkness convinces you the lights were never meant to stay on. You are not someone who lives in the dark anymore. You are someone whose house was just restored to full specification by the hand that designed every room. The next message carries the first room report from a fully lit house, and what the light reveals in the rooms you forgot existed will prove that the architect always knew your house was bigger and brighter than the darkness ever let you see. Type architect lives here if you are leaving this message permanently changed. Knowing the house was designed for light, not darkness. The dimming was circumstantial, not permanent. The wiring was always intact. The architect walked through tonight and restored every room. And the God who designed your house just moved into the hallway, permanently ensuring that no room will ever go dark again without the one who built it being the first to flip the switch back on.